Right, hello everyone. The view from 2050. So what will the world be like in 2050? I'm Tom Standage, Deputy Editor at The Economist, and I spend my time thinking about the future. And I've done this for my whole career as a journalist, which goes back to, funnily enough, this part of the world in the 1990s. So I remember what 2000 was like. Who else here remembers what 2000 was like? Yeah, quite different, right? So we've seen a lot of change, including technological change, since then. Now, technology is not the only thing that shapes what the future looks like, but it's one of the big things, and it then interacts with geopolitics and economics and demographics and climate and so forth. Now, we can see by looking at the last 25 years that technology has transformed the way people live all over the world. And in that time, we've seen the rise of the internet, obviously. We've seen the spread of mobile devices, including in the developing world. We've seen the rise of smartphones and social media. We've seen improvements in gene sequencing and editing. We've seen a dramatic drop in the price of renewable energy technologies. We've seen the emergence of reusable rockets. And, of course, the rise of AI, which didn't work for decades and then suddenly did. And we've seen knock-on effects from all of those technologies in politics, which has been transformed by social media, and where predictions 25 years ago that the internet would promote freedom and democracy have proved wide of the mark. We've seen transformation in economics, where technology has enabled new business models and started us down the road to abundant renewable energy. We've seen change in healthcare. We've seen the social and political and economic impact of AI starting to come through, and we're in the midst of a debate about that. So I'm not taking a position of technological determinism, the idea that technology defines what the future must look like. But what I'm trying to say is that history shows us that the direction of travel depends on the interaction between technology and other societal forces. So today what we're going to try and do is consider some of the technologies that are likely to be important in the next 25 years, and how they will be shaped by and how they will shape those other forces of politics, economics, demographics, and so on. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Chris Ballance, Kate Goodlad, Lucy Grow, and Eben Upton, who can give us perspectives on different technologies. What I'm going to do is ask each panelist to highlight the technology or technologies that they think are most likely to be important, and then explain not just why, but what the implications might be for society more widely. And I hope that if we do that and then argue about where we agree and disagree, we might get a glimpse or two of how things might look in 2050. So Chris, perhaps I can start with you. Obviously, you're CEO of Oxford Ionics, which does trapped ion quantum computing. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you might think that you might be about to suggest that quantum computing is an important technology that might change things. So tell us a bit about about what you do, and without getting into the gory details, what new things it might make possible.
So first of all, one guess, absolutely correct. Quantum computing is going to be transformational, and yeah, I'll talk about it if you want me to. So with computers right now, we can do loads of things, right? We look at what's changed with AI over the last just couple of years. And what we've seen is that we can do way more than we could do ever before. But AI doesn't fundamentally change the hardware, the compute capability that you have to unleash. It saves you developer time, right? All the stuff we can do with AI, we knew we could do with computers, and AI just allows us to build out these applications, get the computer hardware doing what we want it to faster. But we've known since the 80s there's a whole new class of computers out there. So if rather than using classical physics, like the physics of our everyday world to compute, you use the quantum nature of the world, you can make computers that are way more powerful than anything we can do today. And you can solve in minutes problems that you can estimate would take the largest supercomputers thousands or millions of years. So what's really exciting is that there's so many problems out there that we just can't solve with today's computers. If you look back in the 50s, aerodynamics, we couldn't solve that. We had to go build prototypes. Chemistry, we couldn't solve that. We had to go into a lab and test some stuff. And nowadays, we can build aircraft that fly right first time. We can simulate that aerodynamics perfectly. But chemistry, we still have to have people go into a lab. Drug discovery, we have to have people go into the lab. Even optimization, there's so many optimization problems right now, we take a wild swing in the dark, and we can't solve accurately. We know quantum computing can solve all of these things differently.
Do you have a feel of where it might make the most impact? Firstly, when it starts working, I assume it's going to be like AI, where it hasn't worked for decades, and then suddenly it's going to work, and we're all going to go, ugh. Where do you think the immediate impact will be, and where do you think the long-term impact, in the next 25 years, is likely to be?
So the immediate impact the next 5 years is going to be in some really narrow stuff. you can pretty much look at where high-performance computing gets used. About a third of it's for material discovery or drug design.
Right.
It's one of the best applications of quantum computing, and that goes in a high-performance data center. No one ever sees it, and it's a dark.
And is that useful now, or is that you're still waiting for the computers to be useful? Because some people claim they're doing stuff like this now. Are they?
People are doing stuff like this now, but it's a developer tool. People are learning. It's progressing incredibly fast, but we're talking 2 to 3 years till the first real, ChatGPT moment starts happening there. But like any technology, it's an overnight success that's made over 10 years. People could be sitting on this stage 10 years ago talking about quantum computing. It would be very hypothetical. Right now, there's loads of companies like ours who are building hardware that's 1 or 2 generations away.
It does feel like there's been a pickup in the pace of the field, so I'll buy that. People I talk to in quantum are much more optimistic than they were certainly, even 2 years ago. That's happening very quickly. So basically, it means more problems are solvable with computers. Again, my follow-on from that is, what are the sort of likely political consequences of that? Does it enhance communication security overall, or does it undermine it?
Both. Like any transformational technology, it just changes the playing field.
Right.
And then the big question is, how long does it take people to realize the playing field has changed and to react accordingly, rather than they're still playing by the rules of 2 or 3 years ago?
Right. I think that leads us very neatly to Kate. Tell us about the NATO Innovation Fund, because I know there's something called Diana at NATO, which seems to be their version of sort of DARPA, but it's not that, is it? So what is it?
So NATO, about 2 years ago, or maybe sort of 3 years ago, thought it was a good idea to set up a venture capital fund, which might in itself be sort of interesting. So NATO allies put in €1 billion into a fund. Very much sort of 5 to 3 years ago, realised that the future of our collective defence, security and resilience will largely be determined by our ability to innovate, particularly in deep tech. So we're interested in all of the technologies that my fellow panelists will speak about. I think, Chris, you've spoken about it well in that we think that future defence and security will very much map onto allies' ability to harness technological change and actually capitalise on that. And I mean, we were speaking earlier about, I'm sure you'll have seen the news about sort of Russia yesterday and kind of Ukraine, and I think that's an example of where, can you imagine 5 years ago if you thought that you could use drones in such a way to influence a potential outcome in that scenario kind of deep in Russia? I think people would not believe that. So I mean, I think the leaps and bounds you're seeing already in this short time frame are very obvious, and I mean, imagine sort of 20 years where we'll be. So this is very much front of mind today because we have the Strategic Defence Review coming out in this country, and I'm not sure what it says about the relative importance of big, glamorous platforms like aircraft carriers and fighter jets versus lots and lots and lots of disposable drones. But presumably the balance has to swing from the former to the latter. So what, in practice, how does that manifest itself in the kinds of choices you're making about investments? Well, I think we have an investment platform and also an adoption platform. So I think in the investments we're making, we very much focus on innovation. So we'll make quantum investments, kind of compute, AI. We focus a lot on drones, kind of undersea capabilities. I think the other thing we've had to build out as a fund, which is probably different to most VC funds, is what we call sort of our adoption platform. And that's really trying to drive through how do we sell these products into ministries of defence and into governments, because it's still really hard at the moment compared to what it should be. I think there's started to be a shift. When you say it's hard, is this because there's lots of people who say, yes, I really like having lots of fighter planes and aircraft carriers, and it's not as sexy to be in charge of 1 million drones? I think so, and I think it's a mindset that I think people think, okay, we need capabilities and we need sovereignty, therefore we need these big platforms and we need our sort of aircraft carrier, and someone doesn't think, okay, I actually need to buy something that's cheap and disposable and we can replicate easily, or think about it, they're having to contract for technologies that they don't actually understand or are familiar with. So imagine thinking, okay, I'm an MOD and I need to contract for a quantum computer. I don't know, imagine having to do that. It's quite a different job to the one you probably thought of. And I can just jump into that. Yeah, it's exactly that. You have people who really want to adopt the technology, and they're wildly disconnected from the people who control the budgets. Right. And you'll get stories like, yes, this is incredibly interesting. I see we need to do this, but our budget's now set for the next 2 years. So if you lobby this person in about 24 months' time, they can make sure it's in the bill that passes 2 years after that. Right. So in 5 years' time, we'll have money and ability to buy. But do things like the drone attack we saw yesterday in Russia, surely that's a wake-up call to people who aren't taking this
this seriously, the fact that warfare has completely changed. And in fact, if we're about to increase military spending across Europe and buy a completely new set of kit, this isn't a bad time to do it. If we started doing it 5 years ago, we might have invested in the wrong places, right?
That's true. And I think one of the positives of all of these technologies is that they're dual use. So if you, as an allied nation of NATO, are investing in AI or quantum or compute, you're not just building businesses that are very nichely focused on defense. You're building, hopefully, the next generation of the biggest companies in Europe, America. So it should bring broader benefits to society rather than just kind of very narrow companies. So we think that governments are starting to see that. And certainly, I think at the summit, the NATO summit that's upcoming in The Hague, I think there's going to be a massive focus on adoption and kind of what governments can do there.
The other thing, of course, is the political imperative, which is Europe has slow growth. Europe has not been spending enough on military stuff. Maybe we can solve these two problems by crashing them into each other. That sometimes works, right? So that's the plan, that this will kind of miraculously boost growth because we'll just have a massive job creation scheme in dual use and defence tech. So I can see your bet is that that is an area where there's going to be a lot of technological change. What do you think that means for the balance of power politically? Does something like drone warfare, does that mean that smaller powers become relatively more powerful relative to larger power? What does it mean for the geopolitical balance of power?
Well, it's kind of interesting because if you look at Ukraine, I'm not sure if it's because they're smaller, it's just they have been particularly agile and innovative when it comes to the technologies that they're using. Now, is that because Ukraine is smaller, or is it just because they have been quite technologically savvy from the beginning?
And they also face an existential threat, right?
Exactly. So whether it might be that, who knows? I think it will come down to kind of, can countries be agile and adopt these technologies?
And tech savvy.
And tech savvy. But it definitely gives smaller countries, think about Estonia or Lithuania or those kind of countries, it definitely gives you, I think, the possibility to kind of outcompete relative to your size. Whereas in the past, I think you would have said, okay, bigger countries naturally will dominate just because they can sort of build more stuff and have more people.
Excellent. Lucy, you have been involved in various things, but one of them is being co-founder of Scale AI. So I'm assuming you're going to nominate AI. Is that fair? Is that
definitely?
Yeah, excellent. So, and when I say that, and also just more generally the technologies that it enables. So, what are the most exciting areas for you and the applications of it? Chris has mentioned coding, but that's invisible to most people. So, what are you excited by, and what do you think we can look out for in the next 25 years?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, AI is very good at repetitive tasks. Basically, we train AI on all the past data that we've gathered, and then it can repeat that, right? Which is why ChatGPT is so good at doing things like writing stories or figuring out like, oh, this is a script that might go viral, or generating images because it has so much data that it's trained on. I think that in the future we will have these AI agents essentially that will be able to take goals and objectives and be able to execute them for us. So I'm very excited for AI to essentially be our co-pilot in the future. So for example, like with doctors, right? Like they are going to be able to use this AI co-pilot to help diagnose diseases, which they're already doing, but then they're going to be able to focus their time on the hardest problems. So like the 20%, which is like, how do I solve for this cancer? AI might not know that there's a new clinical trial that exists that might be able to help someone survive, but the doctor will know, and they'll be able to continually be kept up to date. And in the like far, far future, you can imagine that the new jobs are going to be these people that are managing all these AI agents and making sure that they are doing their job well, and that they're not being trained on bad data.
So you're saying very much on the AI industry message that it's definitely does not lead to jobs apocalypse and mass unemployment, that this is just going to make us more productive, and the doctors are going to be able to spend more time with the patients, and the radiologists are definitely not all going to be fired, unlike lots of AI people are always saying radiologists are going to be fired. I think they're wrong, but you're basically saying it is a sort of force multiplier. It's improving
It's a force multiplier,
productivity.
Yeah. And we're always going to need reinforcement learning, because if like AI starts generating data, which generative AI does exist, but it's bad data, we don't want it to continue to generate bad data from thinking that the bad data is correct data.
Okay, now I happen to agree that this is, if you look at the history of other technologies and the history of automation generally, when you automate one part of a process, it makes the parts that only humans can do more valuable, and people went from weaving to managing weaving machines. So I buy that argument, but a lot of people don't. And in fact, even within the industry now, we had the CEO of Anthropic last week saying he thinks actually, the industry is just saying this to say, it's trying to avoid being criticised for taking everyone's jobs away. This is a big question for the next 25 years, isn't it? Particularly as we have shrinking workforces, though, and ageing workforces. Aren't we actually going to need an awful lot more automation and a lot more AI and a lot more robots if we're not just going to get a lot poorer?
I agree. I think that you're right in the sense that the top 5% of the U.S. population are going to be the ones that are managing these AI agents, and everyone else will need to find, I don't want to say a new job, but they're going to have to adapt to skill sets that only humans really have, which is human empathy, which is taste, because those are things that AI can't necessarily replicate. So there's going to be new jobs that are created, such as AI ethics, people that are in charge of AI ethics, etc.
Well, the other example, if you look at 40% of jobs in the US survey, didn't exist 15 years ago or whatever. The actual turnover of jobs is there are lots of yoga teachers these days. There were no yoga teachers 100 years ago, that sort of thing. So people will find new things to do. But I'm very struck by the fact that large-scale surveys show that there's a very different attitude to optimism about AI in the West versus in East Asia. And in the West, we tend to be very pessimistic. We've been trained from birth by Hollywood to fear AI. When we think of AI, we think of HAL, and we think of the Terminator. We think of red light comes on, AI is evil, right? And whereas surveys I've seen suggest that in East Asia, which happens to be a place where there are lots and lots of robots and lots of automation, people are more optimistic about the potential of AI. Do you think we might be a bit behind the curve in the West? And do you think that attitudes might shift from, oh no, the robots are going to come and take my job, to actually, they can't get here soon enough because I want to retire? Do you think that shift is coming here?
I think so. I do think that in Asia, they have this understanding that with every single technological innovation, the economy has improved, right? In the US, there is this catastrophic thinking that I believe that is very cultural. There is a lot of hatred towards, okay, cool. They're worried about the dichotomy, I think, that AI is going to create, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we've kind of been seeing this dichotomy happen, I suppose, in the US. But I think that people are going to start realizing that, it saves me so much time and I'm able to make more money. I'm able to scale my time by doing less. And when they realize this, they're going to hopefully change their mindset.
But I suppose that's one of the big questions for the next 25 years. Now, the company you're involved in now, Passes, tell us quickly what that does.
Yeah, so we're a creator commerce and monetization platform. We help creators make millions of dollars monetizing their brand, whether it's through merchandise, subscription, DMs, live streaming, etc. We're working on some cool AI features right now, because I believe the future is that creators are going to be selling their likeness, because it just makes sense. Why are you spending 2 hours doing a photo shoot when AI can generate that photo for you, and you're going to be able to scale your time and not actually have to be there? So you can do what you love and spend your time hanging out with family or making more YouTube videos.
Okay, so follow that thought. Where does that take us in 2050? How do we interact with each other? How we, if we're still doing some version of social media or something, what does it mean for our identity if we're actually in the world as sort of avatars of ourselves?
Yeah, I think humor interaction is still going to be very important. Authenticity is the number one thing that fans...
Well, this sounds really inauthentic.
Yes, but I do think that essentially... brands. So most creators are making money from brand deals right now, right? They're going to be able to choose which brands that they still feel authentic with and scale their time. I think that AI is going to be used to help creators make more and cut out the 80% writer's block time. So for example, if they want to make a viral YouTube video, AI can draft the 80% of the script and they can go in and add their touch to it and finish the last 20%, which is what we're going to be seeing in really every industry, from engineering to like medical to music, etc.
That's interesting. I wonder if you really can scale up. If everything's viral, then nothing's viral. So can you really make things that are more viral more of the time? I don't know. We'll see. That's a tough one. Right, Eben, what would you like to nominate as your technology to watch for the next 25 years?
Well, I'm wondering if maybe now I'm excited about retraining as a yoga instructor. I think we've lived through the last 50 years, we've lived through this really interesting period where largely material science has delivered us a steady increase in the availability of computing performance. Now, over the last 10 years, we've started this is Moore's law and Dennard scaling, right? And over the last 10 years, we've started to see that run into the sand. We certainly started to see maybe not the technological progress, but the economics that underpins it start to run into the sand. Now, obviously, at the up and to the right, Chris, like the work Chris is doing, is kind of attacking new ways of allowing that curve to continue up and to the right, potentially to kind of scream away up and to the right. But I guess what I've been doing for the last 15 years is kind of exploring to what extent we can take that curve down towards the origin. To what extent can you make a computer which is half the price and half the performance, or even half the price and a tenth the performance? And can you keep doing that? And can you keep whittling your way down towards the origin?
So you make computing more available in more places.
You make it more ubiquitous.
How does that interact with AI? Because one of the interesting things that happened with DeepSeek, and just generally, AI is sort of being commoditized, right? So the performance is going up, but the cost per million tokens is still continuing to fall. Yeah. And commoditization of AI is terrible if you're OpenAI and you need to pay back all the investments you're making in GPU farms. But it's brilliant for absolutely everyone else in the economy because it means we can put AI in more places. But running that kind of thing on the kinds of computers you're building that's tricky, right?
Well, there's a fascinating thing that seems to happen in lots of these AI domains as they mature, which is you start off in a world of very large, very dense, very high precision models, and then over time people realize that you can get that sort of return where you can do 100th the amount of performance and only really 100th the amount of compute and really only sacrifice relatively small amounts of performance. And we saw that happen in sort of classificatory CNN, convolutional neural networks for image classification. We saw that happen there, and we saw people going from this is a thing which can only be run on a giant graphics card to this is a thing which can be run plausibly at the edge of the network.
Right, so if you want to do a specific task, then you may be able to distill the models.
Yeah, but you can really see that DeepSeek is the first instantiation of that principle in the LLM universe. The idea that you can actually chase down towards the origin. So I think the exciting opportunity, even as we start to run out of the ability to build faster and faster and faster classical computers, as we run out of Moore's law, as we run out of Dennard scaling, the opportunity to get closer to the origin gives us, even over the next 10, 20, 30 years, the opportunity to deploy compute more widely in our environment. What used to be called ubiquitous computing before it was called the Internet of Things.
And also, presumably, it's not just like smart objects that know what you're doing, but you're talking about robots there as well. Where does that fit into this? Because I think that's the work that's going on with vision, language, action models. Yeah. Basically, the fact that the advances in AI are finally spilling over into robotics. That really seems to be happening, and a whole load of problems that looked insoluble in. The work that's going on at Stanford. There's just some amazing stuff happening. How do you see that playing out as someone who is on the hardware side?
Yeah, so I think there's an opportunity, this kind of world of embodied AI. All of these innovations that we've seen over the last 5 or 6 years are still, to some extent, with a small number of exceptions, still hunting for applications. They're still hunting for relevance. And I think the opportunity to take some of this take some of these concepts, apply them closer to the edge of the network, apply them closer to human beings, and apply them in the physical world at scale, probably is going to be the thing that over 10 or 20 years is going to open the door to AI applications which are actually meaningful to human beings.
So we were all standing outside, so we didn't get to hear Alex Kendall in the previous session, but he talks about embodied AI a lot, and he says, I'm starting with cars, but my mission is actually, AI in the world, and it hallucinates less when you have to ground it in physical reality, and there are just lots of, good reasons for doing this. Okay, well, so we've got, how do you think, where do you think that takes us in 2050 then, if we have ubiquitous computing and we have kind of smartness everywhere? And in fact, I'd like to ask everyone this. if you were a time traveller from Shoreditch in 2000 and you arrived today, the thing you'd notice is that everyone's got a black piece of glass that they seem to spend an awful lot of time looking at. How would the texture, if we were all fell through a time warp now and we walked out of that door and found ourselves in 2050, how do you think the texture of everyday life would look different? I'd like to ask all of you that, actually. Who'd like to jump in? Go ahead, Ed.
Go back in reverse order. I suspect the world already is in a lot of ways friendlier, more accommodating to your needs today than it was 20, 25 years ago, and that little black rectangle of glass is a big and important part of that. I suspect that's the trend that we're going to see as we have more intelligence in our environment, as we have more embodied intelligence in our environment. We'll end up with an environment which is more able to anticipate our needs and more able to respond to those needs.
Where is that friction? Because
it's
interesting you say this, because I mean, the last 25 years, we don't have maps anymore. We don't get lost anymore. And in retrospect, that was a huge point of friction, and it was a huge pain in the arse that you would get lost, or you'd be driving in a foreign city and you wouldn't know where you were. And that's just gone away. And I've been thinking, where are the remaining frictions in everyday life? It turned out commuting was one of them as well. And during the pandemic, we all realised that actually, for a lot of jobs, you don't need to do that either. Poof, that goes away. What are the remaining frictions? I mean, it's down to my delivery driver's taking too many minutes. Or what I mean, are there really big problems that this kind of thing can solve? And how will that look different?
I'm going to pass this back down the line.
Okay. Lucy, how's the world going to look different in 2050?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more autonomy, robots essentially. So autonomous vehicles are already driven more in San Francisco than Ubers, which is very interesting. I think that's just going to circulate worldwide, and then we're actually going to see the structure of cities change to help support autonomous vehicles. In China already, there's literally robot nurses that are taking care of you in a hospital. There's little pee pods that you can do, you pee inside these robot pee pods essentially, and they'll tell you if you're at high risk for a disease or something looks unusual. And this is just going to propagate. We're already seeing robot coffee bar
Right.
Yeah,
so we walk out of that door in 2050 and there's just robots everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's normal.
Because for these repetitive tasks, or things that machine learning, computer vision are very good at, it just makes sense for robots to do the initial diagnosis, or robots to make you your favorite latte, etc. So yeah, I think robots will be very interesting.
Lots of money going into humanoid robots now. Do you think that's lots of money is going into humanoid robots
and I actually think people are going to be living further away from cities, because as autonomous vehicles become more common and easier to access, it's much easier to live an hour away from the city, because your vehicle could be working for you and you could be making money off your autonomous vehicle. On top of that, you can be working when you're commuting, etc.
Or you can sleep
if you are commuting to work still. So because of that, I think cities are going to be more optimized for autonomous vehicles. I think people are going to be living further out of cities, and we're going to be seeing a lot more robots.
Excellent. There was a lovely experiment that was done by some researchers in California about how autonomous vehicles would change the way people lived. So what they did was they gave a bunch of test subjects 24/7 free chauffeured cars. And they said, you've got a chauffeur, you can just take her wherever you like. The thing they all immediately did, this is in San Francisco, was go to wine country. Because you get driven to wine country, you get driven around all the way. You drink as much as you like, and you can sleep on the way home. And the number of miles that they drove went up 8-fold. So this whole kind of, autonomous cars are going to get rid of traffic. Yeah, we'll see how that one works out. So, Kate, 2050, are we all going to be speaking Russian?
I hope not.
So do I. But
will we be in this? I was trying to think. Will we be still in the same environment? Even we will be at conferences. This is my big question of will we be on the stage? And
that's quite a narrow aspect of most people's lives.
Yes.
I'm trying to get to the general sort of texture of everyday existence in the year 2050.
I think I agree with robotics. I think it's interesting though in London, because how do you change the infrastructure of London? I mean, will we have built Crossrail by 2050? I think is a key question.
Crossrail 2?
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, so I do wonder in cities where the infrastructure is essentially Victorian, how will we change the infrastructure of London so that these technological capabilities can sort of help us? I don't know. Maybe we will lag behind a bit compared to other cities which are sort of building themselves from scratch. Will we be speaking Russian? I think not. Will we be I hope we'll be in a, NATO is ultimately a defensive alliance, so I hope we'll be in a sort of peaceful and prosperous sort of time. Does it look... I'd say waters are quite choppy at the moment, being very British about it.
Yeah.
So I hope that we've secured our own sort of defence and security sovereign capability and that we're in a competitive position relative to our adversaries, but we'll see.
Yeah, we've sort of had a holiday from history since the fall of the Soviet Union. That's the problem, isn't it?
I think we're moving into, I mean, no one can deny we're moving into more politically turbulent times, and I think you'd be, I mean, even if you just see it in the press, the kind of talk of defence and security is now kind of, I think everyone needs to have that conversation, and I think it needs to become part of what we discuss as a society and actually think about. I think it's been quite easy to just think, you know, not to actually think about why defending, if we think our values are important to defend and if we think our society is sort of worth defending, that we actually have to think
Absolutely.
about
And the other thing to remember, of course, is that an awful lot of the technologies we rely on today did actually come out of military work. And Alex Karp has made this point that sort of Silicon Valley has become embarrassed by its origins in essentially defence work. So
exactly. I mean, I think there's been a shift.
are people less
now.
embarrassed now?
I think they are. I mean, I think particularly in the last year, I think in America, there's been a massive resurgence in investing in defence tech, much more explicitly defence tech. I think when we think about it in Europe, we're more focused on dual use capabilities, and we sort of talk about defence.
In America, it's Anduril and all those companies.
Because we're scared of China.
But yeah, there's been a massive resurgence in America, and often where Silicon Valley goes, kind of the rest follow. So I think this is going to be a conversation topic now, and it's not going anywhere.
And where do you come out on this, Chris, with the kind of how the world might look or feel or be different in 2050?
Yeah, I think your point about maps is really interesting, since I tried explaining this to my child.
Yeah.
And I got such a confused look. The idea that you could get lost.
Yeah.
You know, and they were saying, well, if the car doesn't tell you where, surely you can pull out your phone. But then surely you can pull out mummy's phone instead if you don't have one. And trying to explain to someone what getting lost is like is fascinating. And I think we'll be sitting in 2050 explaining to people that, no, people really were worried that because you didn't have to do this manual drudge work, that was a bad thing, and somehow
that's the friction. That's the friction. It's the copying and pasting from
exactly
my email program into my spreadsheet or whatever.
You can say now, when you speak to someone and they're explaining how they used to handwrite a letter to correspond to someone rather than using WhatsApp, and they'd have 3 turns a week rather than 3 turns over 30 seconds.
Well, people think email's old-fashioned now, don't they?
Think about COVID. Remember with the spreadsheets where there was a massive issue with kind of how our COVID response went wrong, but just because the spreadsheet sort of ran out of
rows.
Which imagine explaining that to our children sort of when they're 20 in 20 years' time. It'd be ludicrous.
Right. So ultimately, I think we'll look back to people fretting about AI taking away the essence of humanity, just saying, well, having a typist to type out your letter and dictate it to them is so much better than having, a voice AI or something like that doing it. People will just look back and assume that it's equivalent to, I want a typist to type out my letters, and having to do it myself on a computer just, undermines me.
This is
the feeling that people worry about the humanity of creating something versus having the overall creative vision and steering something.
You think that's something that we'll be able to focus on more?
If the artist is holding a paintbrush versus prompting something, it's the same damn thing, right? It's the artistic vision, and all you're doing is accelerating that. And it's the same across everything.
So another way of asking this question is sort of what will future generations mock us for or condemn us for? I think eating meat. Long-haul travel, scrub all those pictures off social media, folks. Oh no, we always go to Cornwall. And I think another one is actually we look back and laugh at, medicine before germ theory when they were like into humours and stuff like that. We are shockingly ignorant about what's happening inside our own bodies now. And once we solve that one, we'll go, my God, people used to walk around and go, cancer, who saw that coming? And we think that's normal. And when that stops being normal, that's another one to watch out for, I think. Yeah,
there will be interesting of how you democratise that. So I think there'll be big progress on the imagine when you can apply quantum computing in a medical context. But then the question will be, okay, when personalised medicine exists, who actually benefits from that? Because I suspect at the moment lots of the drugs that we take probably don't.
They're quite expensive to develop. It's true, but things like GPS, that did eventually trickle down, and maps. That trickled down, and AI, you can get that on your phone, and so on. So I think it is, I think we can be moderately optimistic about that. What might we be maybe a bit too optimistic now? So what are the sort of wild cards for how this could all go wrong? I would throw in there a supervolcano, a Carrington event, kind of 1859 level solar storm. And by the way, the sun has been very active over this weekend. G4 solar storm yesterday. And last time that happened, we didn't have any electrical infrastructure or pipelines or satellites to be knocked down. But we've got those sorts of things to worry about too. I just feel I need to just throw in a little bit of doom and gloom at the end in case we end on too optimistic a note. But I found it very interesting to hear your. It's been great to hear your thoughts about where this might go and how the world might look different. Please join me in thanking our panelists.